I was invisible to him for years, just another employee cleaning his mansion, until the day I saved his life during an asthma attack. That's when everything changed. He finally saw me, not as the help, but as the woman he couldn't live without. I never thought my life would become a story worth telling. Growing up in Cedar Grove, the small town where everyone knew your business and dreams rarely stretched beyond the county line, I was just Sophia Martinez, the girl with worn-out sneakers and big ambitions. My mother cleaned houses for the wealthy families in the neighboring suburbs, and from the age of 16, I'd join her during summer breaks. "Watch and learn," she'd say, her hands red and raw from years of scrubbing other people's messes. "Education is your way out, but honest work is nothing to be ashamed of." Those words became my mantra, etched into my heart as I worked my way through community college, one cleaned bathroom at a time. When Mum's arthritis got too bad to work, the weight of our mounting bills fell squarely on my shoulders. My associate's degree in business administration sat gathering dust as I took over her cleaning routes. That's when Mrs. Winters, an elderly client with connections to the rich and powerful, mentioned that the reclusive millionaire Alexander Reed was looking for new household staff. "He's particular," she warned me, eyes narrowing. "Goes through housekeepers like water, but he pays triple what you're making now." I couldn't afford pride, not with Mom's medical bills piling up, so I applied without hesitation. I still remember the first time I drove through those wrought iron gates, my beat-up Honda looking laughably out of place among the manicured gardens and marble fountains. The mansion was a modern masterpiece of glass and steel, cold and impersonal, much like its owner. The interview with the house manager was brief and businesslike. "Mr. Reed requires efficiency, discretion, and invisibility," he stated flatly. "You'll work 6 days a week, you'll rarely see him, and you'll never, under any circumstances, engage him in conversation unless spoken to first." I nodded, thinking it sounded perfect. The less interaction, the better. I was there for the paycheck, nothing more. Little did I know that fate had other plans, that this job, this simple, straightforward arrangement of me cleaning his spaces while remaining unseen, would become the turning point of both our lives. I couldn't have imagined that the man who wouldn't even look me in the eye during our first brief encounter would one day tell me he couldn't breathe without me, that the invisible housekeeper would become the woman he couldn't live without. They say life happens when you're busy making other plans. In my case, life happened while I was busy dusting his bookshelves and washing his windows, catching glimpses of a complex man hiding behind wealth and walls of his own making. A man I would come to understand better than anyone else in the world. Stay with me to discover how an ordinary woman like me went from cleaning his floors to claiming his heart, and the incredible lessons I learned about love, worth, and courage along the way. Because my story isn't just about a romance that crossed social boundaries. It's about seeing the humanity in each other when the rest of the world only sees labels. It's about finding your voice when you've been silenced and recognizing your worth when you've been overlooked. And most importantly, it's about how sometimes the person who changes everything has been there all along, waiting for you to truly see them. My first day at the Reed Mansion was a masterclass in intimidation. The house manager, Mr. Phillips, led me through room after room of pristine luxury, his voice a monotone as he listed my duties. "Mr. Reed rises at 5:30 a.m. You'll arrive at 5 a.m. to prepare the East Wing. He takes breakfast in his office at 6:15 sharp. You are never to enter his office while he's inside. You'll know he's left when the light above the door turns from red to green." I nodded, mentally mapping the labyrinth of do's and don'ts that would govern my existence in this household. When I finally caught a glimpse of Alexander Reed, he was a blur of expensive suit and purposeful stride, phone pressed to his ear, voice clipped and authoritative. He walked right past me, as if I were part of the furniture. Not rude exactly, just completely unaware of my presence. I'd been warned about this, of course, but experiencing it firsthand was different. It was as if I'd become truly invisible. Days turned into weeks, and I learned the rhythm of the mansion, the way the morning light hit the kitchen counters at precisely 7:32 a.m., how the antique grandfather clock in the hall ran 2 minutes slow, the specific temperature Mr. Reed preferred in each room, changing with the seasons. I became a ghost, slipping in and out of spaces just before or after he occupied them, cleaning away fingerprints and water spots, erasing all evidence of human life from his sterile sanctuary. Sometimes I'd find myself studying the few personal items scattered throughout the house. A photo of a young Alexander with an older man, his father, I assumed, both looking serious and uncomfortable in their formal poses. A collection of first-edition books that showed actual wear, unlike the pristine display copies in the main library. Small clues that beneath the polished exterior of success and wealth beat the heart of someone real, someone human. I noticed other things too. How his dinner plates would come back mostly untouched when he worked late. The way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was watching. The medicine cabinet filled with sleeping pills and antacids, silent testaments to a man who wasn't sleeping well and whose stomach was in constant revolt. I started leaving subtle reminders, a glass of water by his bedside, herbal tea instead of coffee in the evenings, small invisible acts of care he'd never acknowledge or perhaps even notice. Meanwhile, my life outside the mansion continued in stark contrast. I'd return to my small apartment, help Mom with her physical therapy, and collapse into bed, too exhausted to pursue my own dreams. Sometimes, I'd open my business textbooks, determined to finish my degree online, but my eyes would grow heavy before I could complete a single chapter. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was helping maintain the perfect life of a man who had everything I was striving for, while my own aspirations gathered dust. One evening, as I was finishing up in his study, I noticed a financial report he'd left open on his desk. I wasn't trying to snoop, but my eyes caught on a familiar name, Cedar Grove Development Project, my hometown. I knew I shouldn't look, but I couldn't help myself. The report detailed plans to buy up struggling businesses in Cedar Grove and replace them with luxury condos and high-end retail. My mother's favorite diner, the bookstore where I'd spent countless hours as a teenager, the community center that had provided me with after-school care while Mum worked, all slated for demolition. As I carefully put the report back exactly as I'd found it, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I saw Alexander Reed not as the untouchable millionaire, but as a man making decisions that affected real people, my people, without ever knowing their stories. And in that moment, I wondered if anyone truly knew him either, if anyone had ever really seen past the wealth and the walls to the man who ate alone every night in his massive dining room, surrounded by empty chairs. I didn't know then that fate was about to force our worlds to collide, that the careful choreography of our separate existences in the same space was about to be shattered. All I knew was that each day I cleaned away the fingerprints of a man whose touch had never warmed to human connection, and I wondered what it would take for him to finally see the people right in front of him. It was a Tuesday in late September when everything changed. I remember because the leaves had just started turning, painting the vast grounds of the estate in fiery oranges and golds. I was working later than usual that evening. Mr. Reed was hosting a rare business dinner, and Mr. Phillips had called in sick. The responsibility of ensuring everything was perfect fell squarely on my shoulders. I was polishing the silver in the kitchen when I heard it, a strange, gasping sound coming from the study. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. Mr. Reed was supposed to be meeting his guests in the dining room. But there it was again, a desperate, wheezing intake of breath that sent a chill down my spine. Without thinking, I dropped the polishing cloth and ran. When I pushed open the heavy oak door to the study, I saw him, Alexander Reed, the untouchable millionaire, collapsed on the floor, clawing at his throat, his face turning an alarming shade of blue. An empty inhaler, lay just beyond his reach on the Persian rug. In that moment, all the rules and boundaries between us evaporated. He wasn't my employer. He was simply a human being fighting for air. My first aid training from community college kicked in as I rushed to his side, helping him into a sitting position. "Where's your spare inhaler?" I asked urgently, my hand steady despite the panic rising in my chest. His eyes, wide with fear, darted toward his desk. I yanked open the top drawer, found the inhaler, and pressed it into his trembling hand. After 2 desperate puffs, his breathing began to ease, though the terrible wheezing continued. Still supporting his weight, I pulled out my phone and called 911. "I'm fine," he gasped, trying to push my hand away. "Cancel the ambulance." "With all due respect, Mr. Reed, you're not fine," I replied firmly, "and I'm not leaving you alone." Something in my tone must have surprised him, because he stopped protesting. I stayed with him, counting his breaths, until the paramedics arrived. Only then did I remember the dinner guests. I excused myself briefly to inform them of the situation, expertly deflecting their questions and concerns. By the time I returned to the study, the paramedics were preparing to take him to the hospital. "You should go," he said weakly, his eyes finding mine for what felt like the first time in the 2 years I'd worked for him. "I've disrupted your evening enough." "I'll follow in my car," I replied, not even considering the alternative. "Someone needs to bring you a change of clothes, and I don't think your dinner guests are up to the task." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, another first, before the paramedics wheeled him away. The hospital waiting room was a far cry from the luxury of the Reed mansion. I sat on an uncomfortable plastic chair, clutching a small overnight bag I'd hastily packed from his meticulously organized closet. 3 hours passed before a doctor finally appeared, explaining that Mr. Reed had suffered a severe asthma attack triggered by stress and would be kept overnight for observation. When I was finally allowed to see him, I almost didn't recognize the man in the hospital bed. Without his perfectly tailored suit and commanding presence, Alexander Reed looked surprisingly vulnerable. The harsh fluorescent lights revealed dark circles under his eyes and fine lines of exhaustion I'd never noticed before. "You're still here," he said, his voice hoarse. "I brought you these," I replied, placing the overnight bag on the bedside table. "And I called Mr. Phillips. He'll handle rescheduling your meetings for tomorrow." He nodded, studying me with a new intensity that made me self-conscious. "You know," he said slowly, "I don't think I know your name." The admission hung in the air between us, a stark reminder of my invisibility in his world. "Sophia," I said quietly. "Sophia Martinez." "You saved my life, Sophia Martinez." His voice was different somehow, softer, more human. "Thank you." It was such a simple thing, hearing my name on his lips, being seen for the first time, yet it felt monumental. As I left the hospital that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between us. The carefully maintained distance, the choreographed dance of employer and employee had been irrevocably altered. In the days that followed, I noticed small changes. He would acknowledge my presence with a nod when we passed in the hallway. Once, I caught him watching me as I arranged fresh flowers in the entryway, a curious expression on his face. He started learning my schedule, no longer making phone calls when I was cleaning nearby rooms, as if suddenly conscious of disturbing me. They were tiny adjustments, insignificant to anyone else, but to me, they were earthquakes, reshaping the landscape of our carefully separate worlds. I was no longer invisible, and Alexander Reed, I was beginning to realize, was no longer just the millionaire I worked for. He was a man with vulnerabilities, with asthma and sleepless nights, with a voice that softened when he said my name. I didn't know then where this new awareness would lead us. I only knew that for the first time in 2 years, we were finally seeing each other. The weeks following Alexander's asthma attack marked the beginning of a slow, cautious thaw between us. It started with small gestures, a coffee mug left on the kitchen counter with a hastily scribbled note. "Thank you for yesterday. A.R." The note referred to nothing more dramatic than my having remembered to order his special tea from overseas, but the fact that he'd acknowledged it at all felt like a seismic shift. One rainy afternoon, I was organizing the library when Alexander appeared in the doorway. I hadn't heard him come home, unusual, since I'd grown attuned to the sound of his car on the gravel driveway, the particular way he closed the front door. "Don't let me interrupt you," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. But instead of retreating to his office as expected, he settled into an armchair nearby, opening a book of his own. We worked in silence for nearly an hour, the only sounds the gentle patter of rain against the windows and the occasional turning of pages. It should have been uncomfortable, this new shared silence, but somehow it wasn't. "My father built this library," he said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "He collected first editions the way other men collect cars or watches, status symbols, not meant to be read." I paused, my hand hovering over a shelf. "But you read them." His eyes met mine with surprise. "How did you know?" "The spines are cracked on some, dog-eared pages, margin notes." I shrugged. "Books that are just for show don't have fingerprints on them." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, a real one, not the practiced version I'd seen him use during business calls. "You notice a lot, don't you, Sophia?" It was the second time he'd used my name. I tried not to let it affect me. "It's my job to notice things." "No," he said thoughtfully. "Your job is to clean things. Noticing is something else entirely." That conversation marked a turning point. Gradually, his presence when I worked became less unusual. He'd ask casual questions about which cleaning products worked best on marble, whether the orchids in the sunroom were getting enough light, mundane topics that somehow felt significant, bridges being built across the vast chasm between our worlds. One evening, I found him in the kitchen, attempting to make pasta. The scene was almost comical. Alexander Reed, business titan, staring in bewilderment at a boiling pot as if it contained alien life forms. Flour dusted his normally immaculate shirt, and tomato sauce spattered the counter. "I gave the chef the night off," he explained, seeing my expression. I thought, how hard could it be? The vulnerability in his admission made something twist in my chest. Without comment, I washed my hands and stepped beside him, gently taking the wooden spoon. "You're stirring too hard. You'll break the pasta." For the next hour, I guided him through the basics of a simple spaghetti dinner. His inexperience in the kitchen was both surprising and endearing. This man who commanded boardrooms and brokered million-dollar deals had never learned to cook for himself. As we worked side by side, he told me about growing up with household staff, about a father who valued achievement over experience, about the loneliness of a childhood spent in prep schools and summer camps while his parents traveled the world. "Dinner at 7 was mandatory when father was home," he said, carefully slicing garlic the way I'd shown him. "White tablecloth, 3 courses. No one spoke unless spoken to." "That sounds intense," I offered, watching him from the corner of my eye. "It was preparation," he replied. "Father believed every moment was an opportunity for instruction. Dinner wasn't about food or family. It was about learning proper etiquette for future business dealings." I thought about my own childhood dinners, noisy affairs around a scratched table, my mother insisting I tell her every detail of my day, laughter punctuating the meal like seasoning. "That's not what dinner is supposed to be," I said softly, then immediately regretted my boldness. But Alexander didn't seem offended. "No," he asked. "What is dinner supposed to be, then?" "Connection," I answered simply. "It's about sharing more than just food." When we finally sat down to eat our imperfect pasta, it was at the kitchen island rather than the formal dining room. The sauce was too salty, the noodles slightly overcooked. But as Alexander took his first bite, the smile that spread across his face held a boyish delight I'd never seen before. This, he said, gesturing between us with his fork, is the first real conversation I've had in this house in years. After that night, something shifted again. Alexander began seeking me out not just for company, but for perspective. He'd ask what I thought about business decisions, bringing complex problems to me as we shared simple meals in the kitchen. At first, I was hesitant. What did I know about corporate acquisitions or market strategies? But I soon realized he valued my outsider's viewpoint, my way of seeing beyond spreadsheets to the human impact of his choices. I found myself telling him about my mother's arthritis, my interrupted education, my dreams of someday starting a small business consulting firm focused on helping family-owned shops compete with bigger companies. To my surprise, he listened, really listened, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights without condescension. Gradually, I began to see beyond the millionaire facade to the lonely man beneath, a man driven by a need to prove himself to a father who was never satisfied, a man who worked 18-hour days, not just for wealth, but because his empty house haunted him, a man who had everything money could buy, but no one to share it with. And somewhere along the way, I realized with a jolt of alarm, Alexander Reed was beginning to see me too, not as his housekeeper, but as Sophia. A woman with ambitions and opinions, a woman who challenged him and made him laugh, a woman who, despite every effort to maintain professional distance, was starting to occupy his thoughts the way he had begun to occupy mine. The lines between us were blurring, and neither of us seemed to know how to redraw them, or if we even wanted to anymore. The first time Alexander invited me to join him at a business dinner, I nearly laughed, thinking it was a joke. The confusion must have shown on my face because he quickly clarified, as my guest Sophia. Not as staff. When I hesitated, he added, I value your perspective. The Cedar Grove project needs a local voice. Those words, acknowledging that my opinion mattered, silenced my objections. Still, as I stood in my tiny apartment that evening, staring at my limited wardrobe, reality came crashing down. What was I doing? The restaurant was one I could never afford on my salary. The other dinner guests would be executives and investors, and I would be... what exactly? Not his employee, not his equal, certainly not his date. I settled on my one interview dress, a simple black sheath I'd splurged on years ago. It was nothing compared to the designer clothes that would surround me, but it was the best I had. When Alexander's driver arrived, I felt like Cinderella stepping into a pumpkin carriage, acutely aware that midnight would eventually strike. The restaurant was everything I'd expected: crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, waiters who moved like ghosts between tables. As we were led to a private dining room, I felt eyes tracking our progress, curiosity and judgment mingling in their stares. Who was this plain woman accompanying Alexander Reed? What was her place in his world? I didn't know the answer myself. The dinner was a blur of introductions and business talk. I spoke when asked about Cedar Grove, describing the community that existed beyond the property values and development potential. To my surprise, Alexander supported my points, incorporating my concerns into his presentation. When one investor dismissed the impact on local businesses, Alexander actually pushed back. These aren't just statistics, these are people's livelihoods. It was on the drive home that I finally asked the question burning inside me. Why did you really bring me tonight? Alexander was quiet for a long moment, streetlights casting shifting patterns across his face. Because when I'm with you, I make better decisions, he finally said. You remind me there's a world beyond balance sheets. His honesty left me speechless. As the car pulled up to my apartment building, so stark in contrast to the luxury we'd just left, Alexander walked me to my door. The moment hummed with unspoken tension. Then he simply squeezed my hand and left. I didn't sleep that night, my mind racing with possibilities I had no business considering. The next morning, a bouquet of fresh flowers arrived at my door with a simple note. Thank you for your insights. I brought them to my mother later that day, making up a story about a staff appreciation gesture. Her knowing eyes saw right through me. Mija, she said gently, be careful. Men like him don't marry women like us. Her words stung because they voiced my own fears. What was happening between Alexander and me existed in a bubble, protected from the real world. But bubbles are fragile things. That reality came crashing down when Alexander's executive assistant, Vanessa, cornered me in the hallway days later. Whatever you think is happening here, it isn't, she said, her perfectly manicured hand gripping my arm. Alexander has a specific type, and it isn't the help. Claire Woodson, the CEO's daughter he's been seeing, she fits the mold. You're a novelty, a charity case. Nothing more. I'd never heard of Claire Woodson. Alexander had never mentioned dating anyone. The revelation shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. After all, we weren't anything. Were we? That evening, as if summoned by my doubts, a stunning blonde arrived at the mansion. Through the crack in the door, I watched as Alexander greeted her with practiced charm, leading her to the dining room where I'd set the table earlier. Claire Woodson, I presumed, elegantly dressed, perfectly at ease in Alexander's world in ways I never could be. I fled to the kitchen, busying myself with unnecessary tasks, trying to ignore the sound of their laughter drifting down the hall. When I couldn't bear it any longer, I left early, texting Mr. Phillips that I wasn't feeling well. For the next week, I maintained rigid professionalism. No more casual conversations, no shared meals in the kitchen. Alexander noticed immediately, his confusion evident in the way he tried to engage me, only to be met with polite deflection. Have I offended you somehow? He finally asked, cornering me in the library. Not at all, Mr. Reed, I replied, the formal address a deliberate barrier. I've simply remembered my place. Pain flashed across his face. Your place? What does that mean? It means I clean your house, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. And you live in it. It means we exist in different worlds, and I was foolish to forget that. That's not true, he insisted, stepping closer. Sophia, these past months were a mistake, I finished for him. Ms. Woodson seems lovely. She suits you. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Claire is a business associate's daughter. That dinner was an obligation, nothing more. I wanted to believe him, but Vanessa's words echoed in my mind, along with my mother's warning. It doesn't matter, I said quietly. This, whatever this is, it can't go anywhere. We both know that. Why not? He challenged, frustration edging his voice. Because of money? Status? Those things don't matter to me. They matter to everyone else, I burst out. Your board, your investors, your social circle. Do you think they'd accept someone like me, the housekeeper with the community college education and the immigrant mother? His silence was answer enough. And what about you? I continued, unable to stop now that the floodgates had opened. You say it doesn't matter, but you've built your entire life around control and perfection. Everything in its proper place. Where exactly do I fit in that world? Before he could answer, his phone rang, the special tone he used for important calls. Old habits die hard. He automatically reached for it. Take it, I said, stepping back. It's what you do. Work comes first. It always has. As I walked away, I heard him call my name, but I didn't turn around. Some chasms are too wide to cross, no matter how much you might want to reach the other side. That night, I sat on my tiny balcony, staring at the distant lights of the city. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge the truth I'd been fighting for weeks. I was falling in love with Alexander Reed, and it terrified me, not just because of our different worlds, but because loving him meant risking everything. My job, my independence, my heart. What terrified me even more was the possibility that he might feel the same way. Because if he did, we'd both have to decide which was stronger, our growing feelings for each other, or the walls we'd built to protect ourselves from exactly this kind of vulnerability? I had no answers as the night grew cold around me, only questions that seemed to multiply with every beat of my conflicted heart. The argument lingered between us like a physical presence in the days that followed. Alexander tried several times to bridge the gap, leaving coffee for me in the morning, appearing in rooms where I worked, but I maintained my distance. It was safer that way, for both of us. Then came the day I discovered the revised plans for the Cedar Grove development on his desk, the community centre, now preserved, the local diner, untouched. Small businesses offered reduced rent in the new retail spaces. Notes in Alexander's handwriting filled the margins. Sophia mentioned this bookstore is historic to the community and check if Martinez family still owns property on Oak Street. He had listened. He had changed everything based on our conversations. When he found me staring at the plans, I expected anger at my intrusion. Instead, he simply said, "What do you think?" "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because you were right," he replied, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. Progress doesn't have to destroy what matters. In that moment, the walls I'd built began to crumble. We talked for hours that night, really talked, about hopes and fears, about the fragile thing growing between us, about whether it could possibly survive in the real world. "I don't want to be your charity case," I told him frankly. "I don't want to be the project you take on because you're bored with your perfect life." "Is that what you think this is?" he asked, genuine hurt in his eyes. "Sophia, you're the only real thing in my life, the only person who sees me, not my money, not my name, just me." His words wrapped around my heart, warm and dangerous, but doubt still whispered in my ear. And what happens when the novelty wears off? When you remember that I don't belong in boardrooms or galas? What happens, he countered, when you realize I'm not the confident businessman you think I am? That most days I feel like an imposter, following my father's blueprint for a life I never chose. We were both terrified, standing at the edge of something neither of us fully understood. And perhaps that's why, when Mr. Phillips informed me the next day that Alexander's father had arrived unexpectedly from Europe, my instinct was to retreat. Frederick Reed was everything his son was not: loud, demanding, openly dismissive of the staff. Within hours of his arrival, the atmosphere in the mansion changed, grew heavier. I watched from shadows as Alexander transformed in his father's presence. Back straightening, voice cooling, warmth vanishing behind a mask of practiced detachment. I was cleaning the hallway outside the study when Frederick's booming voice carried through the door. "The Woodson merger is the logical move, Alexander. Claire comes from the Wright family, understands our world. The marriage would solidify the business arrangement." My heart stopped. Marriage? Business arrangement? "I'm not discussing this again," Alexander replied, his tone clipped. "My personal life is not a corporate asset." "Everything is a corporate asset," his father thundered. "The Reed name means something. You have responsibilities beyond whatever midlife crisis you're indulging in." "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb. Vanessa told me about your little infatuation with the help. It ends now." The silence that followed was deafening. I stood frozen, the duster clutched in my trembling hand. Then came Alexander's voice, so quiet I almost missed it. "You don't get to dictate my life anymore." "I built that life," Frederick snapped. "Everything you have exists because of me. The Reed legacy has become a prison," Alexander finished. "I'm done living according to your blueprint." The study door flew open suddenly, and I didn't move fast enough. Frederick Reed stopped short at the sight of me, his eyes narrowing with cold assessment. "So this is her," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "The maid who thinks she can social climb her way into the Reed fortune." Before I could respond, Alexander appeared behind him. "Sophia, I'm sorry." "Don't apologize to the help," Frederick cut in. "Fire her and be done with this nonsense." Alexander's face hardened. "You don't speak to her that way. Ever." but the damage was done. The ugly truth had been laid bare. To the world, I would always be the help first. The humiliation burned through me like acid. "I quit," I said quietly, meeting Alexander's desperate gaze. Effective immediately. "Sophia, please." "It's better this way," I told him, removing my cleaning apron. "This isn't a fairy tale. There's no happy ending where the maid and the millionaire make sense." I walked out of the mansion that day with nothing but my purse and my dignity. No dramatic chase, no passionate declarations. Real life isn't like the movies. Sometimes people just let you go. The weeks that followed were a blur of job applications and sleepless nights. I threw myself into caring for my mother, into online classes, into anything that would keep me from thinking about Alexander. But he was everywhere. In business news announcing the revised Cedar Grove project, in the coffee I couldn't make quite right, in the dreams that left me aching with loss upon waking. My mother watched me with knowing eyes. "You love him," she said one evening, not a question but a statement. "It doesn't matter," I replied, the words bitter on my tongue. "Love always matters, Mija," she said softly, "but sometimes it's not enough." I found work at a small hotel downtown. Less pay, longer hours, but a fresh start. The manager was impressed with my attention to detail, my efficiency, skills I'd honed in Alexander's home. I couldn't escape the irony. 1 month after I'd walked away, I received a large envelope. Inside was a formal certificate of scholarship, a full ride to complete my business degree, awarded by the Reed Foundation. No note, no explanation. Just the opportunity I'd always dreamed of but could never afford. My first instinct was to tear it up. I didn't want his charity, his guilt money. But as I sat on my balcony, certificate in hand, I realized something. This wasn't about us. This was Alexander doing what he thought was right, using his privilege to open a door without forcing me to walk through it. The choice was still mine. That night, I dreamed of him. Not the powerful businessman, but the man who'd looked lost in his own kitchen, who'd listened to my stories with genuine interest, who'd changed his business plans because a housekeeper showed him a different perspective. I woke with tears on my cheeks and a clarity I'd been fighting for weeks. I missed him. Not his wealth or his status, but him. The real Alexander, who existed behind the Reed name and fortune. The man who saw me, truly saw me, when everyone else looked through me. Across town, in his empty mansion, was he missing the real me too? The question haunted me as autumn faded into winter. I enrolled in classes, using the scholarship he'd provided. Each day brought new challenges, new knowledge, new confidence. I was building a life beyond Alexander Reed, and yet, in a way, he was still part of it. His belief in me had opened this door. The least I could do was walk through it with my head held high. I didn't know then that while I was rebuilding my life piece by piece, Alexander was deconstructing his. That, as I found my voice in business classes and study groups, he was losing his in boardrooms and social gatherings. That, as I learned to breathe on my own again, he was realizing, slowly, painfully, that without me, he couldn't breathe at all. 3 months passed without a word from Alexander. Winter settled over the city, blanketing everything in soft, white stillness. I fell into a new routine. Classes during the day, hotel work in the evenings, study sessions deep into the night. My professors praised my insights, my unique perspective on business ethics and community impact. Little did they know those perspectives had been shaped during late-night conversations in a millionaire's kitchen. I was working the front desk one snowy evening when my manager approached with an unusual request. "There's a gentleman asking to speak with you, says it's important." The concern in her eyes made me nervous. "Should I tell him you're busy?" Before I could answer, I heard his voice, that unmistakable blend of authority and the slight hesitation I'd come to recognize when he was uncertain. "Sophia." Alexander stood in the lobby, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. Gone was the impeccable suit, replaced by jeans and a simple sweater. The casual clothes should have diminished his presence. They didn't. "What are you doing here?" I asked, painfully aware of my work uniform, the curious stares from guests and colleagues. "I needed to see you," he said simply. "Could we talk? Just for a few minutes." My manager squeezed my shoulder. "Take your break now, I'll cover the desk." We ended up in the small hotel cafe, sitting across from each other like strangers. Alexander looked different, thinner, with shadows under his eyes, and a weariness that hadn't been there before. But there was something else too. A calmness, an absence of the tightly wound energy that had always surrounded him. "You look well," he said, studying me. "The classes, they're going okay?" I nodded. "Thank you for the scholarship. You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." His fingers traced the rim of his untouched coffee cup. "Your dreams matter, Sophia. They always did." The sincerity in his voice made my chest ache. "Why are you here, Alexander?" "Really?" He took a deep breath. "I resigned as CEO." The words hung between us, momentous and unexpected. "What? Why?" "Because my father was right about one thing. The Reed name does come with responsibilities. Just not the ones he thought." Alexander leaned forward. "I've restructured the company, created a new division focused on community-centered development, starting with Cedar Grove. Projects that build up neighborhoods instead of destroying them." Pride swelled in my chest, but confusion too. "That's incredible. But you could have done that as CEO." "Not with the board my father assembled." A rueful smile touched his lips. "Besides, I was terrible at the job. I was playing a role that never fit." "So what will you do now?" "Run the new division, work reasonable hours, learn to cook properly." His attempt at humor fell flat, as tension crackled between us. "Sophia, there's something else." I braced myself, certain he was about to tell me he was moving away, getting married, closing this chapter for good. Instead, he pulled out a small notebook, worn leather, pages dog-eared and marked. My breath caught as I recognized it. My notebook, the one I'd kept in my apron pocket, jotting down ideas for local businesses, notes about sustainable practices, random thoughts about making spaces feel like homes instead of showrooms. "You left this behind," he said quietly. I meant to return it, but then I started reading. He opened to a marked page. "Your ideas about connecting wealthy investors with struggling family businesses, creating mentorship programs instead of buyouts. They're brilliant." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "Those were just daydreams." "No," he insisted. "They're the future. My future, I hope. The direction I want to take my work." He hesitated, vulnerability plain on his face. "The direction I want to take my life, but I need help. I need someone who sees people, not just profits. Someone who understands both worlds." My heart stuttered. "What are you saying?" "I'm offering you a job," he said. "Equal partnership in the new division. Your name beside mine." The offer stunned me into silence. Equal partnership. My name alongside a Reed. It was beyond anything I could have imagined. "If that's all you want," I finally managed, the words barely audible. Something shifted in his eyes, hope mingled with fear. "It's not all I want," he admitted, "but it's all I have the right to ask for right now." We stared at each other across the small table, the weight of unspoken feelings pressing against my ribs. "Why did you really come looking for me, Alexander?" He closed his eyes briefly, summoning courage. "Because I couldn't breathe," he whispered. "Since the day you walked out, I haven't been able to breathe properly. At first, I thought it was just guilt or wounded pride, but it's not." His gaze found mine, raw with honesty. "It's because somehow, without my noticing, you became as essential to me as air." The confession hung between us, fragile and enormous. Part of me wanted to leap across the table into his arms. The practical part held me back. "What about your father? The board? All those people who think I'm just the help trying to social climb?" "My father has returned to Europe." The board has been restructured. A determined expression settled on his face. As for everyone else, their opinions stopped mattering the moment I realized I was miserable trying to live up to their expectations. And what about my world? I challenged. My mother, my community, my life that doesn't involve charity galas and summer homes? A smile, gentle, genuine, spread across his face. I was hoping you might show me that world, if you're willing. He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of mine. I don't want to be a millionaire who can't breathe without his housekeeper, Sophia. I want to be a man worthy of the woman who taught him how to see the world differently. My throat tightened with emotion. And if it doesn't work, if we're too different after all, then we'll have tried, he said simply. But I think what makes us different is exactly what makes us work. You ground me. I challenge you. Together, we're better than we are apart. I studied his face, the earnestness in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. This wasn't the smooth businessman making a calculated move. This was just Alexander, laying his heart bare. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the distance between our hands, linking my fingers with his. Partners, I said quietly. In every sense, equal footing, no power imbalances. Relief and joy transformed his face. Partners, he agreed. Though I should warn you, I still can't make pasta without supervision. Laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, breaking the last of the tension. We'll work on that. 6 months later, I stood beside Alexander at the opening of Cedar Grove's revitalized community center. My mother sat in the front row, beaming with pride as we unveiled the plaque commemorating the event. The local newspaper called it a revolutionary approach to development, preserving community while creating opportunity. They didn't mention that the real revolution had happened in private. A millionaire learning to make his own coffee, attending community potlucks, listening more than speaking. A housekeeper completing her business degree, confidently presenting to investors, bringing her perspective to places where voices like hers had rarely been heard. We still faced raised eyebrows and whispered comments. His world hasn't fully accepted me. My world remains suspicious of him. But we're building something new between those worlds, a bridge made of mutual respect, shared purpose, and a love that grows stronger with every challenge. Some evenings, I find Alexander in the kitchen of our new home, more modest than his mansion but more alive, attempting to cook dinner. He's getting better, though sauce still occasionally splatters the counters. As I join him, wrapping my arms around his waist, I feel him take a deep, easy breath. No more struggling for air, no more invisibility, just two people who found each other across an impossible divide and decided, against all odds, to build a life on both sides of it. Still breathing okay? I tease, a private joke between us now. He turns in my arms, flower on his cheek and love in his eyes. Better than ever, he says, and I know it's true. We both are. Sometimes I look back at the woman I was when I first walked through those mansion doors. Head down, voice quiet, determined to remain invisible. I barely recognize her now. The journey from housekeeper to business partner, from the help to equal, transformed me in ways I never imagined possible. But the greatest transformation wasn't mine alone. It was Alexander's too, from a man trapped in his father's legacy to someone forging his own path. From someone who saw people as functions to someone who sees them as souls. From a millionaire who had everything to a human being who recognized what he was missing. Our story isn't perfect. We still argue about business decisions, about which neighborhoods need attention first, about whose turn it is to do the dishes. I still feel out of place at certain events. He still occasionally forgets that not everyone grew up with privilege. We're two people from different worlds, learning daily how to create a shared one. What makes it work isn't some magical fairy tale ending. It's the commitment to see each other, truly see each other, even when it would be easier to look away. It's the courage to be vulnerable, to admit when we're wrong, to grow together instead of apart. I never expected to fall in love with Alexander Reed. I certainly never expected him to love me back. But life's most beautiful moments often arrive unannounced, disguised as ordinary days that suddenly become extraordinary. That's the lesson I want to share with you. Sometimes the person who changes everything has been there all along. Sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves become the very prisons that keep us from living fully. And sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to see someone for who they truly are. Beyond titles, beyond wealth, beyond assumptions. If this story touched you, remember that true connection breaks through all barriers. Remember that love doesn't care about bank accounts or backgrounds, only the courage to be vulnerable. Remember that you deserve to be seen, to be valued, to be loved, not for what you do or what you have, but for who you are at your core. And know this, whether you're currently feeling invisible or struggling to see beyond your own walls, your story isn't finished yet. The most beautiful chapters may be just a breath away, waiting for the moment you finally find the courage to truly see and be seen. Because in the end, that's what saved us both. Not wealth or status or dramatic gestures. Just two people who finally looked up and recognized the mirror of their own humanity in each other's eyes. And in that recognition, we both found something worth more than any fortune. We found home.